Welcome to Flipping the Tables. I'm Colleen Shaddox. Today, our guest is Mark Colville. Mark is a member of the Kings Bay Plowshare 7, a co-founder of the Amistad Catholic Worker House in New Haven, Connecticut, and many other things. Today, we're talking to Mark about an action he participated in May 22nd in Elizabeth, New Jersey, where pro-Palestinian activists closed down the port to prevent the shipment of weapons to Israel. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you, Colleen. It's great to see you again.
So tell me a little bit about what you did last week and why.
Well, I was invited in by into this we call it a conspiracy, which the root word, of course, is to breathe together. Um, I was invited to breathe together with a wonderful group of young people. I say young people because I'm going to be 65 this year. Um, um, anyway, myself and another a peer of mine who's Lyndon, who has been involved in movements as I have over the years. Were invited in. Actually, to be honest, they were honest with us in part because they were afraid of violence, of police violence against them, um,
Mhm.
and they had experienced that in the past. And I guess they were, in part anyway, I mean, they certainly respected that we are kind of seasoned activists, but it was clear that they wanted to bring in an older and more Caucasian, element to this group in order to hopefully diffuse some of the violence that's typical coming from the police in these situations.
And
So
why
anyway,
Elizabeth, New Jersey? Like what was the
yeah. So
powerful leverage
um,
point there?
again, this group of folks are from the whole region here, but they've been focusing particularly on trying to figure out, how to resist this genocide that we all know it's an acknowledged genocide, um, and of course the government won't acknowledge that either here or in Israel. So they've been scrambling, as we all have, to try to do something to gum up the works here. And one of the things they did a lot of research and they found out that these weapons are not, kind of coming out of nowhere. They're not just appearing out of thin air. They're being built in our communities. Okay. And I live in Connecticut here, as you do. And we both know that, for example, Colt Manufacturing has made and is continuing to make the automatic weapons that are being distributed to the illegal settlements in the West Bank, which I have visited. I've been to the West Bank 2 times in the past 2 years, and then I was there 10 years earlier. And so I'm pretty familiar with the situation there. And you know, uh, uh, anyway, the point is that Elizabeth, New Jersey, as we found out, is the third largest port in the United States, number one. Number two, of all the weapons for Israel for this genocide that are going to Israel on a regular basis, about 90% of those weapons, the ones that are not transferred directly from the military to the Israeli military, 90% of those are being shipped through this port of Elizabeth, which, by the way, also contains an ICE detention center, which I assume, I believe, is also a shipping point
Right.
for
There was a
people
big
kidnapped by
action
ICE.
going on at the detention center at the same time that you folks were blocking the port.
Exactly, and that was just a short distance away. And in fact, when we were released from holding after we were arrested for this action, half of our group, spent the next few days over there trying to nonviolently defend folks and to keep them from being, kidnapped and transferred out of the communities that are theirs. So this is a point, as we found out, this is a real, it's a shipping point. It's a real point from which this oppression is launched from our country. As citizens, um, as people of this country, we have a right to determine how our communities, um, what posture our communities have towards this kind of oppression and genocide. And so there's a very powerful, sentiment among, particularly among, people in their 20s and 30s that are, wanting to respond to this and feeling helpless in many ways. And so I find, and I've always found that small groups like this engaged in, first of all, building relationships with each other and building trusting community with a commitment to nonviolence, and then a deeper commitment to just kind of understanding the reality in which we're living and trying to articulate that in a public way, largely through symbolic action. As a Catholic, this is what I've been involved in for most of my adult life. Okay. And, it's based in, I feel it's really based in New Testament principles as they are articulated in particularly in Catholic social teaching. Okay. And so when it comes to these weapons and these wars, one of the things that really has hit home for me as a Catholic, in trying to listen to my church is that, there are situations in life that you can't really do anything about. Okay. I mean, in terms of immediately changing a situation. But see, that's where our faith comes in. When, from a biblical perspective, if we're going to live from a biblical perspective, even when we can't change something, we must bear witness to it. And when it comes to weapons, the overarching teaching that we're getting from our culture is that these weapons are for our protection. And when it comes to nuclear weapons, our ultimate protection is in these weapons. This is what we're being told, okay? And so as a Catholic, again, I have to pick up the New Testament and understand what idolatry is, when
Mm.
God is removed from the place of providing my ultimate security, I have departed from the faith. And so that's a very hard lesson for Catholics to learn these days, particularly because, if we take a real cold, hard look at our history as Catholics, just look at the past 200 years. Why is the Catholic Church so susceptible to fascism, right? Um, it's there's a and I think I've come to understand through activism and through, again, trying to do what the disciples did, right? The disciples gathered in a small community up against Goliath, um, in a time when it was a political statement that could get you arrested to say Jesus Christ is my Lord and Savior. This is the context into which the disciples, engage the world after the resurrection of Christ. Okay.
And I don't want to put words in your mouth, but that's what you were doing when you were lying in the street in Elizabeth, right? You were saying Jesus Christ is my Lord and Savior.
Absolutely. And I was, frankly, praying the Hail Mary as my protection. And so I deeply believe in this, in the power of a small group of committed people, to change the world. And again, it's important to understand that my primary, from a Christian perspective, my primary motivation, again, when it comes to war, is to get my name off those weapons. Okay.
Hmm.
It is time, for Catholics, as we have let's face reality now. There's a, you know, by the standards in which we're accustomed to live a life of faith, what we have going on in our government now is a fascist cult that has taken over. And I say cult because it's based in faith,
Yeah.
a perversion of faith, an apostasy of Christian faith, Christian evangelicalism as it's expressed in this government. Okay. And so it's idolatrous. And without dissenting from it, we are capitulating to it. As an old mentor of mine named Phil Berrigan used to often repeat, dissent without civil disobedience is consent. Okay.
Mm.
Um, now, again, a hard statement, but I mean, if we have to understand the context in which we're living now. Not only is there no future for this country, but what's happening is the this apostasy of Christian faith has taken hold, not only in the government but in our culture, um, and so we have to try to have a holistic response to that with our entire lives, and so that's where, and again, I was raised in, in the Catholic Church, and I've pursued that conscientiously, to live out a Catholic faith for most of my adult life. And I found that the only real way to sustain that kind of a life is to be connected to a community, um, that is taking on the same yoke. So that's why I like to join these small groups. And frankly, I was really gratified by being invited. A lot of us, older folks that are on the streets for these actions, we can be overlooked, and in fact, in some ways, we deserve it for the world that we've been passing on to the next generation. But also, some of my methods in organizing ideas and such are, let's say, they're maybe not outdated, but they don't respond adequately to the times. And part of my own discernment is to try to not only nurture the movement of good, faithful people that are trying to have a public, nonviolent response to this, but also to lift their voices, to help their voices get lifted, because I do believe I have a deep faith in the generation that is now taking over. I don't know about how you feel about that, but I assume you do too.
Yeah, I do. I think the kids are all right. And these
Yeah, good way
kids,
to put it.
they came up with some really practically innovative ways to to block that port. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? I was really impressed by your
Yeah,
hard
so
work.
um so we realized, kind of like the old parable with Jesus, when you before you build the house, you got to count the bricks and see if you can
Hmm.
build it. Well, we got to a point several weeks ago where we realized that maybe we didn't have enough people to block this entire shipping. This It's a huge several lanes of traffic, into which these trucks go to unload their weapons onto the ship. So some of our folks went on eBay and bought a an old RV and an old boat with a trailer. And one of the problems with that was that it had to be registered under somebody's name in order to not involve the sellers of these things. So
Hmm.
I volunteered to take on that responsibility. So those things are in my name, and now I'm facing all kinds of traffic violations, as well as criminal violations for having participated in this action. But what we did was, we parked these things across the entrance, and then we used a method that's known as bottling, which is typically you take a PVC pipe that's about 4 or 5 feet long, and on either end, folks will stick their arms into it with a chain around the wrist, and then there's a bar that you install inside there, and then you hook onto the bar, and it's a way of a more permanent way of blockading something. Now, we our innovative young folks here made a version of that, which I believe is called a dragon's tail, which is a super reinforced version of that typically takes several hours to cut through. In this case, it took about 3.5 hours. But we so we linked up. There were 8 of us linking up through these bottles around these vehicles, so that it would make it. We again we did some research on the cost of delays in the shipping, and it's quite
Hmm.
high. So yeah, we are certainly trying to to throw a stick or an iron bar in the spokes here, because at some point you've got to words fail, and particularly when we're dealing with a fascist cult, there's no there becomes very little room uh, to talk about morality, or to be understood. That this is a moral. I would call, and I've been again reflecting on this quite a bit, that in the gospel Jesus talks about, among other things, the times that we're living in right now cause
Hmm.
me to look at some of the really hard statements of Jesus. And one of those was about the unforgivable sin. You might remember that there's a part in the Gospels where, Jesus suddenly says, you know, after the Pharisees are complaining about, that he's from the devil or something,
Hmm.
and he says, that all sins will be forgiven except for this one, the unforgivable sin. Um, and essentially what Jesus is saying is the sin against the Holy Spirit is to attribute the work of God to Satan. Okay.
Hmm.
I have come to believe that fascism is the ultimate political expression of idolatry. Okay. Um, that's what fascism is. It's a moral injury. It's a moral break. Um, and so it's not that Jesus, it's not that God doesn't want to forgive that kind of sin, but that kind of damage to the conscience, the suggestion there, as I understand it, is that that's not repairable. Okay, and so appealing to people's morality, and I've experienced this even within my own family. I have, I suspect that some of your listeners may have been experiencing this too, that there's
We
no
talked
there's
about
no
this in our first,
communication.
yeah.
Yeah. Um, and so I'm in kind of deep discernment about what to do with that in my own family. And then again, the hard sayings of Jesus. If you come to me, you must leave behind your mother, your father, your siblings, etc. What does that mean? Okay. How does that connect with the Gospels? Anyway, these things are all kind of coming up in me, and of course, in my faith development, what I've come to understand is that, faith is a practice, um, um, and it's an engagement in it's an engagement in a circular process of reflection and action, meaning that when you read the Gospels, um, when I read the Gospels, I need to act on it.
Hmm.
Action makes my reflection on the Gospels deeper and more clear. Reflection also clarifies the situation outside my door, in
Hmm.
my own neighborhood, in the world. Reflection clarifies that in order to make more faithful kind of action. So I see that as sort of the Christian way, the way of trying to live out the faith. And then, also again, talking about, what are, racism, for instance, right? Um, I've come to understand racism is not an opinion, okay? Racism is a behavior.
Hmm.
I'm borrowing a little maybe from Ibram X. Kendi, who wrote this book about how to be an anti-racist, but that's kind of an experience that I've really gotten in touch with, particularly with the descent of the masked thug police called ICE. Um, that Yeah, that voting for Trump makes you a racist, in my opinion, at this point. Why? Because racism is not an opinion; it's a behavior, and we know the extent of white supremacist thought and policy is going into this administration. So if you voted for him, there was something in there that made the racism not be a deal breaker. Okay.
Right.
And so
Right.
anyway, these are some of the things, and then the other thing I wanted to say was, I approach these, this activism, these actions, and getting with these small groups and stuff. It's very much to me related to how people lived, in the New Testament. How
Hmm.
you look at the Acts of the Apostles; they're in and out of jail every week now when we go to Mass, right? And then some of them are getting killed and all that. So it's not all that unfamiliar. One of the things that strikes me as a white Catholic living in Connecticut all my life uh, is that just within the past couple of years, maybe you want to say since Trump got reelected, I don't know. Um, I don't get too much involved in the electoral politics. That might have been the point where people started in this country, people like me, um, and most of my peers. We kind of walk around with kind of a morbid sense of humor now, talking about because it feels like the world's going to end, right? Um, well, again, in thinking deeper on that for myself, I started to wonder, well, why am I in this panic now, and I wasn't 15 years ago? I mean, I felt the situation was serious, but I didn't think it was, you know, that the world
Hmm.
was ending, right? And you
Yes.
know why? Because now, what we're seeing now, whether we want to admit it or not, what we're seeing is the collapse of our structures and systems that we depend on, to keep us alive in this country, right? We're experiencing that. I'm experiencing that as a old white male Catholic. Okay, what I really have gotten in touch with over the past couple of years is, I've lived in the hill section of New Haven, which is the poorest section of New Haven and the most child populated section of New Haven, and the one with the least parkland, by the way. I've lived here for whatever, upwards of 40 years. And what occurred to me was, uh, in my neighborhood, the world is always ending.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, the system collapsed. It was already collapsed when I moved in 1994. Okay. The people in my neighborhood understand the world is ending. Okay. And then I got to, well, again, take that to the Gospels. Blessed, what does blessed are the poor mean? I've always thought of it as sort of a pat on the head for poor people because you're suffering now, but I'm on your side, right? Well, now I'm coming to understand that statement in a whole different way. The poor are ready for this. Okay.
Hmm.
Poor people are ready. They've already experienced the collapse of society. Okay. They've already experienced, as we are experiencing now, the guns that were pointed that way towards Iran and other countries.
Hmm.
Now those guns are being pointed at us. Okay. That's been that way for people of color for my entire life. Okay. Now I'm getting in touch with it. So all of a sudden, the world's ending, right? Well, I think not only do we look to our low income communities, for how to move forward, but we also look there. I mean, that's where you're going to go right now if you're looking for hope. Okay. Um,
Hope was the word that occurred to me. This crumbling of establishments, is it in some ways a hopeful thing that middle class white people like you and I now feel insecure because the system was always deeply evil and needed to be changed? Is there hope now that maybe we might make real structural change?
yeah. Well, I'm. I guess I would have to admit I'm essentially clueless about how social change happens, except to say that, it's my deep faith or belief that, and based on evidence, that change comes from the bottom up.
Hmm.
Um, the mechanics of that I don't understand, because although a couple of things I do understand about having lived in a again in a low income neighborhood by choice for my entire life is that from this perspective, it looks to me over the past 35 years, however long I've lived here, that it looks like out there, all the rich and the powerful people they're breaking everything. It's like we live in a world full of spoiled brats. The spoiled brats are running the world, and they just keep breaking everything. They throw tantrums, they break stuff, and what do the common people do like us? Those of us we pick up the pieces. It's you know. Uh, a lot of these romantic ideas that we may have grown up on with so-called maybe liberal
Hmm.
theology. I don't know what that is. But these things aren't romanticized anymore for me. They're like I watch it happen. The disaster strikes like on a daily basis all the time at this point, and people just stay calm. They go about assessing the damage, fixing things up, cleaning up after. Everybody's done throwing tantrums. I want to be with the cleanup crew, I guess.
Let's talk about your role in the cleanup crew. I remember you once saying that getting arrested was part of your vocation. There are other ways to live Christianity. You could be, I don't know, feeding people. Well, you are feeding people. But there are many paths that one might choose. Why is yours to confront the law or the so-called law?
Because that's what I read in the New Testament from the first page to the last is basically it's you know if you look at it from that perspective, it's an argument with law. I mean, it's a it's a discernment over what should our relationship be to law. um, and so and of course even any legal scholar or a student of legal history would tell you that there is no good law without the breaking of bad law, right? Um, that, but more deeply, okay, as a person of faith, I came to realize, first of all, how great of a hold that the law has on our conscience, okay, to the point where, um, after Jesus's life, where he was recognized as a lawbreaker and executed for such. Okay, that that there's something that my relationship to the law has it's rooted it's the root of my faith. It comes from how do I approach the law. We as people of faith, we tend to automatically equate the law with obedience to law with virtue. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
um, it's very important to me uh, to not let the law, and again, the Gospels just scream this about the law. The law is weaponized by pyramid-based systems of power. The law is always weaponized, and it's always used to beat on poor people. Okay, and so if we're trying to figure out what the Beatitudes mean, um, it's got to be. It leads us into a confrontation with law. Nowadays, I when I speak to churches, um, one of the things I'm fond of saying is that if Jesus was preaching in Connecticut today, um, I believe the first beatitude would still be "Blessed are the poor," but I also believe that the second beatitude would be "Blessed are the liable." Okay. Jesus did not live in a litigious society. He didn't live in a society that was literally controlled by insurance, where all of my good intentions have to get funneled through insurance companies in order for it to be legal. Blessed are the li I mean, if anything, if the Gospels teach us anything, um, when poor people are criminalized, we need to be among the criminals. Okay. Um,
It's funny. I first got to know you when you were about to serve some time in federal custody for an anti-nuclear action. Um, and I was concerned about you. I thought, wow, this poor guy. And you very much you referred to it as going on retreat. You
Absolutely.
you were pretty sanguine about it.
Yeah, I mean, part of that is, there's a mystique around jail that we automatically tends to terrorize us. It takes maybe a little bit of breaking through that, but suffice it to say, when you go into that, well, I mean, really, in my experience, when you go into any kind of situation with a nonviolent ethic and posture, it defuses 90% of the conflict and violence that might come your way. Um, so there's that. Uh, but again, this yeah, and uh, a couple things about going to jail. It has really placed hardship on my family, and on my relationships in my family. It's been a real suffering for us to be separated like that. Number one. Number two, when when we started, again, we've been at this now as a family for since 1994 here at Amistad. Um, One of the things we immediately realized when we started as a family getting involved in this kind of resistance that risks jail, um, we immediately took another step. We reached another plateau in terms of our ability to live in solidarity with our neighbors here. There is not a family on my street or in my neighborhood. I mean, I would love to see the family that has not been touched by this kind of separation, okay? And sometimes for extended periods of time. And so again, our mission as Catholic workers is to try uh, to live in community with our neighbors, to try to live like our neighbors. We're not trying to be we're not a church. We're not well funded. We're not nonprofit, and that's the reason. People don't get to claim tax exemption for the high rents that they pay here. $1,600 for a one-room apartment, a one bedroom apartment.
Yeah,
Uh,
if you can find it. Yeah.
yeah. So anyway, part of our, the Catholic worker, by the way, works on some very simple principles of the daily practice of the corporal and spiritual works of mercy, not depending on the church or the agency or the government to do that, but we do it at a personal sacrifice. Nonviolence, both as a personal lifestyle and as a method for engaging the violence in our own community and trying to do away with that. And then communal living, the traditional notion in the church of voluntary poverty, shared resources and such. So that's how we've tried to live out this life. And again, jail puts us in an automatic position of solidarity with our neighbors. The other thing is, there was never a question, and when I've done a couple of long jail sentences for federal crimes against the nuclear idolatry that our government's engaged in, which has resulted in long periods of prison. I've usually had to explain that at length to most of the people in my life, particularly those with whom I grew up. Um,
Hmm.
I never have to explain why I went to jail um, to anybody in my neighborhood. Okay.
Yeah. That's
Um,
very interesting.
they understand it. Blessed are the poor.
Yeah. Well, we're going to have to leave it there, but I do want to ask, what do you want listeners to do? What are
Well,
a couple
I'd
of
love
things
for folks.
to do to support the folks in Gaza?
Yeah, well, first I would love for folks to follow the example of these young people. Again, some of them are really leery about even letting their names be public because
Hmm.
they fear real repercussions, particularly from the Zionist community. But to just what when I say follow their example, partly what I mean is look around your community. You go to university, your university is most likely involved in making weapons or in furthering this fascist policy because the government has infiltrated all of these things. These weapons are being built almost like we're growing gardens in our own backyards. These weapons are being constructed right in our midst, in plain sight, uh, and again, as we this group has now brought to the surface, to the consciousness, hopefully, of the community, that 90% of the genocidal weapons that are being used right now are going through that port.
Mm.
We need to resist that. Now, there are two companies, Zim and Maersk, the shipping companies. Zim is an Israeli company, the fourth largest company in Israel. They've already been evicted from the West Coast port. I believe it was in Oakland
Oakland, yeah.
back in 2014, maybe. Um, they've been evicted from several places throughout the world. Okay, there are right now places all over the world where these companies are not allowed to ship weapons to Israel. We need to achieve that here. Okay, I got involved in this action in large part because number one, I knew it wasn't going to be reported here. We've even been censored. It's hard to find it now on
Mhm.
Instagram. We've been flooding the social media with reports on this. It's getting censored. The to me, what was really important, especially having come back from the West Bank in December, was to let the world know that we in the United States are with the global consensus that this genocide has to end. And do whatever you can. If we're talking about a faith perspective, take that to prayer. I've got to get my name off these weapons. How do I do that? Um,
Thank you, Mark Colville. You have to promise to come back again.
Always. And thank